Hi, well, firstly, thank you so much for the invitation. Very pleased to be chatting and making stuff today with you. Yes, my name is Rosa Rogina, and I'm a trained architect working across architecture and curatorial, if you wish, currently leading the London Festival of Architecture, but also working across different projects here at MLA.
Can you take us back to the initial moment and why you chose to study architecture?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess I'm in that camp of people that had architecture sensibilities and skills already in the family. So my father is an architect, and I think that kind of creative thinking was always embedded in my growing up and education as a child. So now kind of reflecting back to awkward moments of really, really weird children's books or spending, afternoons in museums reviewing very back then weird sculptures and art pieces, I guess have consequentially led for me to also pivot in that creative direction.
And sorry, we can start the collage anytime.
So what are you making?
Well, it's really up to you. We tried to get a range of images. Some of them are from past LFA events. There's just a range of images, and it's just a collage, about blank canvas, anything you want to make on it.
Well, that's really incredible because for me, like LFA is very much about collaging the city, and it's kind of bringing the fixed, the institutional and very established and set with much more kind of softer layers with activities, people, but also just some things that are slightly unexpected in the public domain and that you just might be able to do something that is temporary and you promise you will leave very soon. So I think lots of these images are starting to illustrate that creativity and injection of bold ideas, colors into everyday places. I think it's really about thinking about how in an environment and situation where I think only just under 30% of people go to museums, how we can kind of create inclusive programs that cater for the remaining 70% that might not instinctively enter an institution. So I guess lots of our premise of working is around what if you bring that culture into everyday spaces? What if people stumble upon the festival on their way to work or on their way to local market? And some of these elements that you have printed just here are starting to tease out some of those moments in the city.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's do it. Do you want me to cut or you want me to...
So I will cut them out. If you want to rip them off too, that's fine.
Okay, we need some music. I think let's start with music and flowers.
Cool.
I think a bit of green, a bit of fuzzy vibes, and always a very good idea, food. So let's bring that as our center for now.
Did your MA at Goldsmith, and that was in research architecture, engaging with global matters. What is research architecture and how do you think it can be used as an activist tool?
Oh, God. Yeah, well, I mean, maybe tracing back how I got to there. I did my bachelor degree back in Croatia, where the role and position of an architect in the society is very determined. So it's about brick and mortars, it's about, building buildings. And I think as soon as I started to kind of broaden up my perspectives with some also international experience that you mentioned, I quickly realized, actually maybe there is more to that.
Yeah.
And in a way, kind of repositioning thinking that architecture is a set of skills and almost like a toolkit to which you can take and then do very different things across society and environment, which consequently also led me to where I am today. Has back then brought me to this idea of expanding my horizons by undertaking another master course at Goldsmiths University, which was precisely set around those premises. So how do we use knowledge and tools of kind of the architectural domain in the fields of environmental and social justice?
What was your thesis?
Oh, yeah. So my thesis is very not connected to what I'm doing today, but it does link up from where I come from. And it was looking into different temporalities of environmental violence. And I was looking into how landmines, which actually there are quite a lot of them in the territory of Croatia, residues from Croatian War of Independence in early 90s. They are small devices, but because they are kind of hidden and not discovered within the soil of large territory, they're still active in some form. So for over 200 years, they can still be contaminating the territory. They can explode in any moment. And I think the central argument of that was that we see landmine crises across the world predominantly to a human perspective, which absolutely is important and crucial. But the environmental violence of both the kind of contamination, but also the fact that the land is totally not usable for such a long period of time. And then in order to take those devices out, you need to demolish everything. So that's much less spoken about. And I think in this instance, it was again those kind of architectural skills and spatial thinking applied to, kind of domain that is very much in a kind of more justice territory, if you wish, to unpack some of those conditions through our 1-year research project.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Most of your research has been translated into international work. You know, you did the Montenegro Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. What's the most powerful lesson you took away about temporary design, and how has this impacted your role at the LFA?
I think the domain where I work with, which is kind of provisional, temporary, ephemeral, has great strengths, but it also has lots of challenges in a sense, particularly in the world where we are becoming very importantly more aware of, the kind of environmental footprints, creating any kind of additional unnecessary waste, just being realistic that these projects are extractable in their own sense. So I think the biggest learning from me to kind of seeing lots of different setups across the world, and lots of different festivals doing brilliant things in their own ways. For me, where the work and where I'm putting my efforts in London is really that connection with the city. So whatever we do, it's not about kind of gating the architectural community to discuss important matters, but it's really kind of opening up those walls, stitching those conversations in everyday environments. And even projects that are, let's say, more conventional flagship festival projects, such as you would imagine, like big wow moments, so like the pavilions, things that people will travel to see. For me, they have to be meaningful and really kind of doing something in the locality they're working. So lots of our work is kind of shifting from maybe not always being a kind of pavilion based, but more kind of really thinking about how through the vehicle of the festival you can or improve and kind of create more safe everyday environments. So a pavilion might become an underpass, or it might become a section of a towpath, or it might become, I don't know, like a mini roundabout, somewhere on the outskirts of London. It's kind of that idea of what repositioning as well, what a hero festival project in a contemporary city might be.
So it's like giving it a double purpose for the community it's placed in.
Yes, the festival is temporary, but it's about how do we design lasting legacy, and how do we leverage the potential of temporary to get to our end goal. So often I see in this field of work, you're allowed to do some things simply because they're temporary. So you will say, we'll close the road, we'll test it, but we promise within 72 hours we'll be, out.
Yeah.
But then that, serves as a case study, serves as a kind of leverage tool that you can really start pointing out how the road could look like long term should it be kind of closed permanently. So it's those nuances in between. How do you very strategically work with what you have in order to change that same place in, let's say, 5 years?
For me, I also really like how the LF is not just design architecture, there's also quite a lot of events and workshops. So it's like you're bringing the community in to have discussion, live on past the month of the LFA, which is nice.
Well, that's really interesting that you picked up, because that's certainly one of the main objectives of the festival, which was founded in early 2000s, particularly with the main kind of objective to open up that discussion around architecture. So and one way to do it is to situate it in public space, but then equally, like, how do you ensure that people who should be around the table are feeling empowered and encouraged to be there? So lots of our work here around is as well into thinking how we increase the participations as event organizers of people who fall out completely outside of the industry. So community organizations, individuals. So lots of that work is going into mentoring, is going into workshops and building skills with different communities across London, which then ultimately results in a much more diverse program, and not only by attendance, but also who runs those events as well. 2025 was the first year where workshops as an event type was the most reoccurring event typology. So kind of surpassing, things that you would more commonly expect in an architectural festival, such as talks or exhibitions. This was the first time we had, I think, like 130 workshops across London, which I think does demonstrate that shift into much more kind of co-authored, shared, open, and hopefully also leads the direction for future editions in the same way.
As the director of the LFA, what does your job involve on a day-to-day level? What's the hardest part of putting together a citywide festival?
Oh gosh, I mean, lots of things, lots of firefighting, but lots of really exciting conversations. I think the most challenging bit is where the creativity and like the will and experimentation hits the reality and like risk averse environment of London and in general, cities across the world. So how do you how do you continue to be exploratory and bold, but also meeting all the regulatory requirements? So and working across 20 plus local authorities and different footprints where the land is public, some is private, some is TfL, some is Network Rail. So it's a very interesting dynamic, and I think these are the moments where some of the, I guess, kind of like more difficult challenges, but also opportunities emerge. You have to play, but it has to be safe.
Yeah.
You can climb, but not so much. So it's kind of negotiating that kind of, I guess, balance in between risk and safety, softness and rigidity.
Like, you just mentioned TfL and Network, and I realized that I never considered how many people are involved in ensuring that the festival actually happens. Like, it's not just the LFA deciding stuff is going here, and you have to be in constant conversation with so many authority bodies around London. How do you manage that, and does it hinder it more than it allows the festival happen?
Well, I think for me it's a very exciting territory, and I think London, in a way, how it's distributed. So I think London as a city has over 600 high streets, which is quite unique. And that means that it's by its nature decentralized. So if you want to do a decentralized festival, London's kind of footprint is playing in your advantage. But then also the way how public realm here is owned and managed is quite different to other cities, particularly across Europe. So it's not that, you sign off something with local government and then you can just pretty much go and do it in the same way across different squares in the city. But here, each locality is requiring a slightly different approach, and particularly because we are interested in this less commonly associated spaces with the festivals, which are those kind of everyday thresholds. So if we're talking about an example, we are currently working with Wandsworth Council on an underpass in Clapham Junction. And if you just think of an underpass, it has something above, it has walls, and it has a road in between. All of those can be of different ownership, of different stakeholders. Obviously, it's a kind of, it's a highly trafficked environment, so it has slightly different regulations than putting something in a white cube space. There are interplays, at play in those environments, but I think that's what is also making it exciting. But you do need to work hard in order to make some of those projects happen. So day to day, a real mix of delivery of the next year and working with the team on delivering the next year's festival, but it's also trying to break out of the cycle of just thinking about the following year and be thinking subsequently about multiple years ahead. Because I think if you are constantly trapped in an annual cycle, there is so much you can do. So there are some projects in making that, are already kind of thinking about 27 or beyond. It's a bit of a mix. And then also like constantly being tuned in what else is happening, ensuring that what we do is relevant. I wish I could do more work with other festivals. I think because obviously it's very unlike that one city will have multiple festivals of architecture. You're often kind of silent in your work, but certainly there are other cities across the world that are doing the same thing, and it was great. There were a few moments in the last few years where we did manage to convene with some other festivals of architecture, but that's something that perhaps is maybe missing from that equation.
And what would you say is the most rewarding part of the job?
I mean, the most rewarding part of the job is definitely seeing the festival in action.
Mm.
And it's definitely that moment where, you kind of pause and let others do their thing. And, you kind of see, yes, my role was important in a way of kind of putting it all together and sometimes connecting people. But actually it's other people that are delivering work. So the festival has usually over 400 events, which majority, so we're talking about 98%, are run by individual event organizers, ranging from cultural institutions down to individuals and students and anything in between. So in a way, it's seeing those people in action, speaking about the festival, in their own ways, of course, but kind of the network being mobilized is, I guess, the moment of the biggest reward.
With the last festival, the theme was voices. What would you say is the biggest challenge in bringing a diverse range of voices together to execute the festival?
I mean, it's certainly difficult, and I think what we were trying to do two things with that theme. One was to really, really encourage people to look beyond their boundaries and to be thinking about who are my neighbors, who else is in the area, how can we work much more collaboratively, how do we break down barriers so people who maybe want to be engaged but are not part of the industry in any way could understand and could equally participate, not just to be kind of listening in, but would have a same level of stake. So that was one challenge and objective we set ourselves with the curation panel. And another one, which I touched briefly just before, was that idea of diversifying the event types. So again, if we're talking about opening up the participation, including members of the general public in the conversation, not just as listeners, but also as active participants, probably not all event types are doing us a favor in the same way. So I think we don't really need to work hard. How do we, structure talks so they're kind of inclusive and kind of open? That's not to say we should totally abandon talks as a format. Absolutely not. But it's kind of thinking really hard. How do we open up that access and remove barriers? And that's where the workshops came very prominently, because I think people felt that's the way where, similar how you brought all of this. If you now ask me that I need to do a portrait of you, I would completely freak out. But because you have provided me, some kind of tools that I can, creatively but relatively easily start putting some ideas on the paper, I feel more empowered to do it. So I guess it's just thinking about that.
You run an LFA event as a student. How would you say students can get involved with the LFA?
Yeah, great question. Maybe I will go back to my experience and then I will answer your question. It was a really funny one. When I came to the UK for a more longer term period, I enrolled Royal College of Art, and I was studying there under public works, and we were exploring this idea of architecture and activism. So one of the first projects we did was a live project in Wembley in Brent, where we were asked to run a kind of alternative university space in order to engage different local communities and members of the public in a small-scale master plan. So in a way that kind of much more open-ended and collaborative design process. And the word that still resonates very strongly from one of my tutors was, you need to organize an event. Which back then as a student, very comfortable behind my screen and with my pen and like thinking creatively, completely freaked me out. How do I organize an event? I don't have a space, I don't have funds, I don't have the network, I don't have the knowledge. But then it really kind of made us think hard how we can make an event, but also how we can like situate it in London-wide context that it made sense. And somehow we came across LFA and felt, that's the way we could really platform what we are doing. In a way, there was no fee access to enter the program. We were equally promoted to, much bigger and much more professional and much more established organization. And suddenly this garage space in Wembley Triangle where we were building our things and testing different ways of working with the city became a venue for a quite well-known festival of architecture. And we had visitors, yes, from the local area, but there were also people traveling down from Oxford and other places to see, some of the events that we naively as a students were running. So I think if the setup of the festival was not so open and inclusive as we felt it was, we would have never dared together. And then going back on your point, how the students could get involved. I mean, we would encourage students to be as involved as they want to be. I think there is a component where, of course, people can, attend and use the opportunity to visit as many studios and, think about what their next steps in the career. But I think there is also much more active way of getting involved. So it's about carefully thinking about your thesis projects, and particularly for the ones that are working with the live fabric of London, can the festival be somehow used to amplify and platform their work? Obviously, the festival always falls at the very end of the academic project. So another thing we are thinking with a number of universities in London is how maybe LFA could be built more in student briefs. So there are some studios that actively take the decision that their final output or a fragment of their work would be exhibited as part of the LFA. So I think that there are different ways of that. I think with kind of that networked approach where we work with almost all the local authorities in London, there is an opportunity as well with kind of that brief setting and how do we ensure that we somehow support the academia, as the cycle of projects are going from year to year. But again, in an individual capacity, hopefully so many different ways for people to get involved. There's nothing stopping you to submit an event and run it next year. It can be anything from a talk, workshop, performance. Students are very welcome.
That's actually really interesting. I like the point about trying to embed it within the course syllabus, because then it gives you something to look forward to if the project was run in collaboration with, I guess, at large, the city of London. Like the impact is more seen and you're working with something that's a bit real. And
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So the LFA has been going since 2004. How have you seen it evolve over the years you've been here? And what's the single biggest change you want to make to the festival?
Obviously, it's always very challenging to take on something that has been going for such a long time and that has been hugely successful. So when I took on the role of the director of the festival in 2021, it was by no means, removing everything what's done. I think the hardest thing is to keep going, actually. And the festival was always really good from early days with that live engagement with the city. So if you kind of browse historic images of the festival, you might stumble upon Renzo Piano and Richard Rogers hoarding sheep over the Millennium Bridge, exercising their right as freemen of the city, again, using legislation to bring tens of thousands of people for, one might say, silly act, but again, like unpacking the conversations around architecture through something that is tangible and interesting for people who otherwise might not engage with it. To works on Exhibition Road in 2008, so the street framing some of the key London museums in South Kensington that initially was closed for a period of 4 days to test a shared surface move towards pedestrianization, because up to then was a very busy road with coaches and taxis dropping off people. And it was the festival that then later on was used as a kind of proof and leverage to change the road more permanently ahead of London Olympic Games in 2012. So those moments were very, very interesting. And I think where maybe the shift in recent years, or although it's soft, it's not like fundamentally changing the kind of main optics of the festival, is that idea of broadening up from the center into particularly outer boroughs and maybe neighborhoods that are not associated with, let's say, more traditional definition of great new architecture. So in a way, principles around perhaps the Exhibition Road project, but not only in kind of South Ken area, but also in different kind of pockets of London across. So that's one thing. And then I think the other thing as well, even prior to when I took on the role of the director, the idea of looking at the commissioning processes and how actually we can maybe move more towards a kind of open competition model for lots of this work, where on one hand, because we have power to co-create briefs, we kind of push them in a more direction where it's really about empowering emerging, less experienced, non-traditional teams and individuals to get their first commissions in those work. And that ranges from anything like, a series of benches that then are the project is particularly designed that even students can do them. And now it's really nice to see across the years how some people who have significantly grew in their practice still reference some of these small projects that obviously had an impact and influence on the trajectory of their practice. So I guess lots of kind of creation of these moments where you can give space and voice to different kind of teams, collectives, and setups to test work.
So now we have to finish the college before we move into the next
Yes.
one. Okay.
I feel we need like some sort of building. Let's do this.
Cool.
We can do. You don't have to. Like just cut a bit of it or something.
Like the building at the back? Or...
Yeah, you can cut just So we see just a little bit of shiny glass.
Yeah.
We need a bit of shiny glass.
It's interesting that you mentioned trying to situate LFA events in broader areas of London.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. And I felt particularly this year that we got more kind of curiosity and traction of places that people were like, oh, what is this doing in the program of the festival? That's very interesting. I should go there, rather than, some maybe more expected and established places. So it's always really interesting. Thank you so much, to be moving and kind of expanding the map. Obviously, people can submit their event anywhere in London, so by nature it is already decentralized. But it's kind of creating those hubs of activity, which historically were predominantly central, to be much more dispersed as well. And then something what I enjoy, particularly with lots of little projects in terms of scale, not impact, that obviously we work very carefully with all the teams to ensure that those projects have a legacy where they can. Obviously, the budget is limited, so some materials are not permanent. But nothing is permanent. So we do a bit of work to ensure that benches and planters and other things can go to schools, community organizations, and different places. So something that happens to me quite regularly is I walk somewhere on weekends and I'm like, oh, that's our bench. And then like, oh, that's our bench. And I had days where I saw like 3 or 4 projects in the same, in one walk, and I was like, that's really interesting how. Yes, they are no longer in their original locations, but lots of these projects live somewhere else and bring, elements of that well-being and safety and joy in spaces which, might not have bits of it. So yeah, I think we are there. So we have music, food, flowers, bit of animals, and then we have an overlay of shiny, permanent, and some colorful temporaries.
Complete.
Yeah, I think that's it. That's what about the festival.
Okay. Cool. Oh, we got that because that was
Montenegro. Yeah. We can do that as well.
If you had any advice for architecture students, what would you?
I would say when you start working, take risks, be ambitious, try things. I had a feeling, particularly like with my kind of cohort of colleagues, that people didn't dare to try or didn't even dare to like submit, their portfolio or interest somewhere because they felt, they don't have maybe sufficient experience or for whichever reason. So it's particularly in those like first 5 years of transitioning from education to practice where I think, you should be trying out lots of things, continue being informed, go on events, make sure, you see what else is happening, volunteering, just, kind of broaden up your spectrum and don't expect of yourself that you know already what you want to do in 10 years. It's about just trying things out, and maybe something that, for the first day you thought that's definitely the trajectory, maybe it's not in a way. I know certainly when I finished my bachelor in particular, I was very certain, I really want to go to work in big established practices. And now when I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure whether that would be my, decision maker if I were to go back to traditional practice. Or I would say completely opposite. Maybe it's much more interesting to work with somebody kind of small, still in the process of setting up, and where, my role and involvement might make a much bigger kind of difference to where it goes. I don't know, but just kind of keep it open is, I guess, the...
Yeah. Realize I haven't been to this part of the building because I've been to the other side. That one, like the
Guildhall Gallery. Yeah. So we're here 2.5 years, I think. So I can show you. So LFA is run by New London Architecture, and we are a membership organization. And basically, the whole NLA was framed around this model in, again, early 2000s because they did it for, there is a separate, part of the same family, but a separate business that are model makers. And they made the model of London. And then as soon as it was put in the public domain, there was a bit of a realization that, people really, get engaged and start to search on the model where their house is. So in a way, then the whole idea of an organization that supports and facilitates that conversation emerged. So it's a 1 to 2000 model of London, which contains, obviously it's a limited area. London is very wide and non-dense, that contains all the projects that have passed planning. So in a way, it's not a representation of what London is perhaps today, but what, should all the kind of plans as they are in planning go ahead, how it will look like in the next 5, 10, 15 years. So everything that has a planning. And that's why I think it's interesting, because it's not 100% representation of what you see out, but what it will come. And then I think then we have the city one, which is a bit more zoomed in and bigger in scale, which is also interesting because you can also see how different legislation, particularly the kind of viewing corridors in which you cannot build to allow the views, particularly to St. Paul's Cathedral, determine the shapes of buildings. So the cheese grater is like this because of that. So you start to understand some of the how policy and legislation then projects into the design and configuration of urban space. I think the funny thing is the first instinct people are doing is like, this is my house. It's the most common thing you can hear. And even I did that when I first saw it. And then, and then, they start to kind of understand. Because I think it's quite unique. It's not a flat map. It has that third dimension. So I do think for people who are not as skilled with drawings and maps like we are, because we are trained in that, they can suddenly understand this relationships a bit better.
What is your most unpopular opinion about architecture?
Oh gosh, I think I will try to bring it down to the domain of my work, and I think it's something to do with language. And I do think that, as an industry, we're working really hard to remove barriers, to open access to for people from all sorts of different backgrounds to participate in that conversation and process of design. But we are still speaking in a very traditional forms of vocabularies and language we use. And we often see that when a wonderful moment in the festival's calendar comes when the call for entries closes, and then we as a team need to go through all the submissions, and it's always the architects that have the most challenging texts to like decode, and words like Anthropocene start to be surfaced, and it's just thinking about how we open that access on all the levels. So how we draw, how we speak, how we communicate. I think it's really, really important, because otherwise we will be just alienating all the other people and sectors, and we will be just speaking to ourselves. So yeah, that's my popular opinion.
Great. Okay, we're done. We can show everyone the color.
Music, planting, greening. We need to green our city. Food, always a great convener and a starter of so many brilliant conversations. And then just overlaying the kind of fixed and established and shiny with alternative ways of kind of thinking about creating space. So whether it's through more soft and mobile structures that move with the wind and weather conditions, or is something that sits in between, but with its colors mimics something slightly new and something different. And then I just thought to add a dog on the bike, on the skate, because it's just cool. Yeah?
Yeah, it's a great color. Yeah. Okay. Thank you all for watching, and see you next month.
Thank you so much for inviting me.